Hello, my name is Lee-Anne Peters Caregivers. I'm going to be sharing an essay I wrote about my sister Lee-Anne and our family's experience with her death prior to medical assistance in dying. While many of my peers were doing things that young teens do, I was visiting my mother Tracy in the manor we affectionately called the old folks' home in my hometown. My mother was in her early 30s, and my brother, myself, and sometimes my baby sister would stay with her after school until my father would get home from work. My mother had early onset Huntington's disease. She was living in the manor because she couldn't take care of us anymore, let alone herself unsupervised. She smoked heavily and drank hot sugary coffee like it was on tap. She loved us unendingly, but was unable to parent us. Huntington's disease was in the process of stealing the very part of her that made her our mother. In 1993, Sue Rodriguez was fighting for her legal right to have a physician-assisted death. My mother and I watched. My mother understood what a victory would be for Sue, and she understood what that victory would mean for her children. We spoke about it only once, and it has set the tone for the remainder of my life. As we watched Sue through the screen of the TV, my mother turned to me and said, "I hope this goes through. I know it will not help me, but I hope this goes through for you." Although my mother's language was starting to fail at that time, I clearly understood that she wanted my siblings and me to be able to make choices for our own lives and deaths. And that if we so wished it, we could plan our deaths and limit our suffering at the hands of Huntington's. My mother did not end her own life. I learned only recently that she had begged my father more than once to take her out back and shoot her, put her out of her misery, to save her. My mother was a young, vibrant woman with 3 children and the blade of a guillotine pressed to the back of her neck. She carried tragic memories of her own biological father's life. Huntington's disease had made him mean, and it cut a deep wound in our family tree. My biological grandfather, Ron, died in his early 40s in 1978. Initially, he was thought a drunk, misdiagnosed and misunderstood by everyone around him, his wife, his children, conceivably his own doctors. He was left to decay in the Ponoka Sanitarium and eventually died in Red Deer. His lasting unwanted gift of Huntington's disease would go on to destroy 2 of his daughters and eventually 3 of his grandchildren's lives. My Aunt Laurel died in 2001 after her recently placed feeding tube became infected. She was barely 40. It would be just over 1 year later that my mother would succumb to the devastation of Huntington's. She died July 2002. She was just 43 years old, 5 months before her first grandchild would be born. Emaciated by starvation, lack of fluids, and the nonstop jerking movements characterized by Huntington's disease, my mother died. The last few days of her life, her heartbeat slowed. Her jerking movements became more muted, and I imagine that she must have started to feel some relief, knowing that her life sentence for a crime she never committed was almost over. I started genetic testing shortly after my 18th birthday. I was the oldest of Ron's 6 grandchildren that could potentially have the Huntington's mutation. It was a 6-month process of genetic counseling, blood tests, and therapy. If I had the Huntington's mutation, I was going to end my life at a time and place of my choosing, while I still had control. But I wouldn't wait so long that I could not do it on my own. I was defined I was gene negative. I was spared. Five years later, my baby sister would start the genetic testing process, knowing that I had been gene negative. I'd won the genetic coin flip. I knew she was jealous. I knew she was angry, and I don't blame her. I'd won the genetic lottery, and she'd lost the only game that ever counted, and there was no studying or cheating for. I harped on her about birth control and making sure she had some sort of will, an advanced consent plan in place. I promised to always be honest with her about the disease and what it was doing to her. I'm sure my honest observations were like knives in her heart. Her hourglass was flipped, and Huntington's disease was the demented timekeeper. My poor, vibrant 18-year-old sister was thinking about living wills and processing the absolute certainty of her death, and the visuals of our mother's many years in palliative care, and her recent death were tearing her apart. Lee-Anne eventually moved to BC, and her first, and I believe, only true love. She didn't want us, her family, and friends to see her deteriorate. She desired to have an independent life for as long as she could. She fell in love and lived and worked independently for a year or two. Then at 25, her friends rallied to her needs, and with my parents' help, they started what would be an incredible journey of creating a patient-centered care for Lee-Anne. This care allowed her to maintain her independence for as long as possible and kept the threat of institutionalization as far as possible for as long as possible. Her greatest fear was being institutionalized and having no control over what little life she did have. Lee-Anne guarded her independence, and her caregivers dutifully watched out for her while keeping us informed of the changes Huntington's disease was making on her body and her mind. The last 2 years of Lee-Anne's life were beautifully documented by her community. As I now watch the videos and look at the pictures, I can see this devastation that Huntington's wrought on her mind and body. She sat feet from an air conditioner to cool her overheating body. Her once beautiful skin was torn and fragile from the blasts of air whipping her face to keep her cool and comfortable. Her once lithe and dancing body was bloated and moving uncontrollably, making it almost impossible to feed herself or bathe on her own or move to the bathroom safely. Her failed attempt at killing herself with alcohol poisoning had ravaged her liver and pancreas, leaving her bloated and in incomprehensible amounts of pain. The beautiful singing voice she had carried was warped by muscle twitches and choking hiccups for breath. Her music was silenced. Her creative outlet for poetry slowed and then stifled. Her funny little pictures turned from composed works of art to that of a child's untrained chalk drawing. A once caring and compassionate friend, she'd become selfish and demanding, like an unmanageable child. Smells were overpowering, tastes were changing, food acceptable one day could not be tolerated the next. Choking was a constant threat. Tripping and falling, shocking and painful for her, heartbreaking and helpless for us. Lee-Anne made many attempts at ending her life. Some silly and romantic, some well thought through and failed. Each time she was alone. Each time she was scared. For all but one, she had a going away party, a death party of sorts. Her last attempt was successful, and she told only a few she was going to see her mother, her nephew, and lost dream baby she'd named Blip. She promised me she would watch over our brother, who had turned to drugs and alcohol, and that he was not my responsibility anymore. She promised she would be with my son on the other side in Aslan's land, her own version of heaven. She was happy, and she was peaceful, and she was determined. Lee-Anne did not want to die. She wanted to live a full life until living wasn't possible. Living means many things to many people. To Lee-Anne, this meant being independent, enjoying the gifts of friendship, music, family, and whatever whimsy the world could throw at her. When those gifts were threatened by her condition, the enjoyment of life stolen from her, she wanted to die, and in her eyes be with the mother that was ripped from mothering her due to Huntington's disease. Lee-Anne quietly died August 14th, 2015. We were to later find out that she had been hoarding her pain management pills. She would have had to tolerate incredible amounts of discomfort to do this. Lee-Anne's death, although we're happy for her to be free from the punishment of Huntington's disease, has been a struggle. My sister died alone. No one to hold her hand or sing her to the other side as she lay dying. No one to comfort her and hold her as her heart slowed and her breathing shallowed and then stopped. My father was not with her. The man that was there as she drew her first breath was denied the right to be with his daughter at her chosen time to die, her last breath. This has been incredibly hard for him. His baby girl is dead, and he could not be with her. She chose to protect him, when he feels he should have been there to protect her. Based on the current law, because of the nature of Huntington's disease, the situation would not have changed. Bill C-14 does not recognize advance directives. The best my sister could do was have a DNR placed by each exit and next to her bed. However, this unbearable situation is changing in many families in Canada. Medical assistance in dying is making it possible for families to be together, to bear witness and support their loved ones at their chosen time to die, rather than hiding in the shadows of shame. We still have much to do, but there is hope. Thank you.